Out of the land of the tobacco plant come a tall, hard-riding, long, lean bloke, feared by his friends and enemies alike, called by the name of Johnny Smoke. Johnny Smoke. Johnny Smoke. Where are you heading, Johnny Smoke? How many silos will be empty tonight? How many men will lie still beneath the sky? How many tears will be shed because of you? How many more will die? Out of the land of the tobacco plant come a tall, fast-growing, long, lean bloke, feared by his friends and enemies alike, feared by all who come to know the name of Johnny Smoke.
July 2nd, 1971, 6 p.m. For the past 4 months, Jim Morrison has been hiding out in a rented apartment in Paris, on the run from his rock idol image and trying to establish himself as a serious poet. He has spent the day with his old friend, Alain Resnais. It will be the last day they ever spend together. In 11 hours, Jim Morrison will be dead. When Resnais tells Morrison that he has to leave for a dinner engagement, the singer begs him to go out with him for one more drink. Morrison may have turned his back on his public, but he's not good at being alone.
You know, there's a great quote about fame that says, it's not satisfying, but it's addictive. And that's true. What happens is you get used to that attention. Jim was very used to that attention. So in Paris, not having as much of it, I'm sure there was a little bit of loneliness, a little bit of isolation.
But in 1969, as a member of The Doors, Jim Morrison was still very much the center of attention in all the wrong ways. Although his band was as big as the Beatles and Bob Dylan, his drinking and antisocial behavior was now completely out of control. It drove a wedge between him and the other members of The Doors. But instead of toning down his wild ways,
cigarette?
He blamed his problems on his rock god image, manufactured for his fans. And on one particularly hot night in Miami in 1969, he decided to drive one final wedge, this time between himself and the people that made him a star, his public.
Jim had been drinking. He had seen the stage performance in Los Angeles the night before where the whole cast was nude. And I think he decided to test some limits.
As if to mock his sexy image, Morrison removed his shirt, threatening next to take off his pants.
Now Ray, knowing Jim's unpredictability, knowing that Jim had been drinking, said to me, "Vince, don't let Jim take his pants off." I put my fingers in his belt loops and I put my arms against my hips and lifted. In fact, it's a wonder his voice didn't go up an octave.
Taking a cue from Morrison, the audience stripped down to the buff.
The audience followed suit where more than 50% of the audience was actually naked.
The authorities were not amused.
Crime Commission, I'm calling upon the Dade County Grand Jury and the State Attorney's Office to immediately take criminal action against the group known as The Doors, and we are demanding that action this day.
A few days after the show, they charged Morrison with lewd and lascivious behavior, a felony, even though many claim he never removed his pants.
The guys couldn't tell. They were looking at their instruments, and Jim doesn't remember whether he was, whether he did or he didn't.
I am willing to state here unequivocally, Jim did not in any way, shape, or manner take his pants down, open his pants up, or expose himself in any way. It was physically impossible for him to do it.
But whether he did or not, he was of special interest to the FBI, who had been keeping close tabs on him for quite a while. They saw him as a menace to society.
In research for my book, I obtained the FBI files on Jim Morrison. Now, a lot of that is blacked out, but suffice it to say that the FBI was definitely interested in Jim Morrison, monitored his activity, and had him on a watch list.
The FBI's interest in Morrison was maybe less about public nudity and more about his anti-Vietnam War lyrics on songs like Peace Frog and The Unknown Soldier. But in July 1971, as a rock and roll exile in Paris, Jim Morrison seems hardly a threat to anyone but himself. As he drinks with Alain Ronay near Place de la Bastille, an enduring symbol of the French Revolution, the only rebellion brewing is the one that's violently raging through Morrison's body. His attacks suggest he's suffering from acute respiratory distress.
He had had difficulty lately. He had spit up blood a few times. He had had some other problems, respiratory problems. Some of this went back to an injury he had jumping out the window at the Chateau Marmot in L.A. and doing a Tarzan act off a drain pipe and then falling and smashing off the shed of the place and injuring himself.
Morrison should be looked after in a hospital. Instead, he's busy ordering yet another beer. His friend Alain Ronay announces that he has to leave to meet a friend. They will never see one another again. In just 10 hours, Jim Morrison will dabble in more than just alcohol, and it will cost him his life. Shortly after Alain Ronay leaves, Jim meets up with his girlfriend, Pamela Courson. To the world, they look like a typical couple in love, out for a stroll in one of the most romantic cities in the world. But since first meeting back in 1966, their relationship has been anything but typical. The pair first met at a Sunset Strip club called the London Fog, where the Doors were the house band. Morrison called her his cosmic mate and dedicated poetry and songs to her.
And that remained constant and genuine. It did not, however, in the process make him monogamous.
Jim's philandering ways got him in trouble when he was caught red-handed with rock groupie Pamela Des Barres.
I was a cute young girl, and it was 1967. It was Laurel Canyon, and Jim Morrison was next door, and it was really, you know, a very exciting moment. So I walked in, and there was Jim. And he turned around to me and he said, "Whoa, get it on." That's what he said a lot of time. He said, "Get it on," instead of hello. And so I was like naked there on his floor, and he was leaning over me. And just as that was going on, Pam walked in. She has good timing. So she promptly kicked me out.
Beautiful and strong-willed, Pamela Courson did not take Morrison's infidelity lying down. Their fights were the stuff of legend.
Their relationship was very wild, tempestuous. They pushed off against each other. There was a lot of, wild fights and things like that.
To buffer the fighting, they kept separate homes. Morrison stayed at a motel near the Doors' headquarters, while Pam lived at a house on Laurel Canyon, immortalizing the Doors' song, Love Street. In their own strange way, they had found love.
And I don't think they ever really thought about being with somebody else on a permanent basis. I think that, they knew that they were the love of each other's lives, and they would always come back together.
But for all the comfort that Pamela brought Jim Morrison, she had her own demons, a strong appetite for heroin. Many saw her as unstable and a bad influence for an already troubled Jim Morrison.
She was a junkie. In fact, was the cause of a lot of stress and fighting and arguing with Jim and a lot of his drinking. She was probably the worst influence on his life.
But tonight, as they make their way into a Paris movie theater, they are the picture of domestic bliss. They have come to see a film recommended by their friend, Alain Ronay.
Renee suggested that he go see Pursuit, a movie that starred Robert Mitchum, and Jim liked Robert Mitchum. So he went. He wasn't that impressed with it from what Pam said later, but, it was all right.
But in 7 hours' time, nothing would be quite all right. The young couple's domestic bliss will turn dark and tragic, and the world of rock and roll will lose one of its brightest lights.